The rain came down like judgment the night she reached his door, a hard, slanting curtain that turned the dirt road into a ribbon of mud and made the oil lamp on the porch tremble as if it were afraid too, and she stood there with her hair plastered to her cheeks, dress soaked and heavy, knees trembling not from cold alone, but from the weight of the choice she had already made and could not undo, because in her arms was a wicker basket lined with a threadbare blanket, and inside it a small pale puppy slept, breathing soft and unaware of how close it was to being left behind by the only heart that had loved it, while behind the half-open door the rich cowboy of Blackwood Ranch watched her with a look that men like him wore when they expected trouble, but refused to show fear, his hat casting a shadow over eyes that had seen cattle die, men break, and fortunes shift without warning. Everyone in 3 counties knew his name and his money, knew the iron fence that marked his land and the rules that came with crossing it, and she knew them too, which was why her voice shook when she spoke, why she did not step onto the porch but knelt instead, lowering the basket carefully onto the wet boards as if placing something sacred at an altar, whispering, "Please, please take my puppy," like a confession dragged out of her chest, because asking a man like him for mercy was the same as stripping your soul bare in the rain. And for a moment he said nothing, only watched the basket as the puppy stirred and let out a soft, helpless sound that cut through the storm sharper than thunder. And the woman flinched as if it had cried her own name, memories crashing into her of nights spent shivering in a shack with a dying fire, of hands that had once promised safety and then vanished, of a road that offered no kindness to a woman alone, and she forced herself to keep talking before fear could silence her, telling him she could no longer feed it, that the town had turned its back, that she was leaving before morning because staying meant something worse than hunger, something she could not say aloud. And as she spoke she kept her eyes on the puppy, not on the man, because if she looked at him she might see pity or disgust, or worse, indifference, and either would break her resolve, while the cowboy leaned against the doorframe, rain slicking the brim of his hat, listening with a stillness that felt heavy, because he recognized the sound of someone standing at the edge of everything they had left, and when she finished, there was only the rain and the lamp and the quiet breathing of the puppy between them, until she pushed the basket an inch closer to him, the smallest surrender, and rose to her feet with the slow care of someone who knew if she moved too fast she might collapse, turning as if to go before he could refuse her, before he could tell her that the world owed her nothing. But that was when he spoke, his voice low and rough from years of dust and smoke, not loud enough to challenge the storm, yet strong enough to stop her in her tracks, saying her name even though she had not given it, because he knew everyone who passed through his land, and the sound of it on his tongue made her shoulders stiffen. And then he said the words that would follow her for the rest of her life, "You stay too," not as a question and not as charity, but as a decision already made. And she turned back slowly, disbelief and hope colliding in her chest, rain running down her face so he could not tell whether she was crying, and she shook her head at once, saying she could not, that she was only asking for the puppy, that she did not want trouble or favors, that she would be gone by dawn. But he stepped aside and opened the door wider, warm light spilling onto the porch like an invitation she was too afraid to accept, and he crouched then, surprising her, lifting the basket with hands that had broken horses and counted gold without trembling, and the puppy woke fully, blinking up at him, tail thumping weakly against the wicker, and something softened in the cowboy's eyes, something he had buried a long time ago when kindness had cost him more than he was willing to lose again. Yet he stood and carried the basket inside as if it belonged there, setting it near the hearth, before turning back to her with the same steady look, repeating, "Storm's not done with us yet. You stay." And in that moment she understood that he was not offering her safety because he pitied her, but because he had seen the same fight in her that he had once carried, the fight to survive without becoming cruel, and she crossed the threshold at last, the sound of the door closing behind her, sealing off the rain and the past in one heavy breath, while the puppy curled deeper into its blanket, unaware that its small life had just changed the course of two others. And as she stood dripping on the worn wooden floor, hands clenched at her sides, the weight of exhaustion finally settling in, the rich cowboy of Blackwood Ranch turned away to fetch a towel and a bowl of milk, muttering about stubborn storms and worse roads. But she heard something else in the way he moved through the house, something like loneliness easing its grip. And though she did not yet know the rules of this place or the price of staying, she felt for the first time in months that the road had not taken everything from her after all. That sometimes a door opened, not because you knocked hard enough, but because someone on the other side remembered what it meant to be left in the rain. Morning did not arrive gently at Blackwood Ranch. It came with the lowing of cattle, the creak of old beams warming under a pale sun, and the sharp smell of wet earth rising after the storm. And when she woke on the narrow bed near the hearth, for a breath she forgot where she was and reached instinctively for the puppy, panic clawing at her chest, until she heard its soft whine and felt its small, warm body pressed against her side, safe, alive, and that single truth steadied her more than sleep ever could, because the night before had felt like a fever dream. The rain, the door, the cowboy's voice cutting through her fear like a blade wrapped in cloth, and now the reality of staying pressed in on her, heavier than hunger, heavier than pride. She rose quietly, smoothing her borrowed dress, and stepped outside where the ranch stretched wide and unforgiving, fences cutting the land into long, patient lines. And there he was already, the rich cowboy everyone feared and envied, moving among his men with calm authority, giving orders without raising his voice. His presence alone enough to keep chaos at bay, and she stood uncertainly until he noticed her, tipped his hat once in greeting, as if her being there was the most natural thing in the world, then went back to his work, a silent message that she was not a guest to be stared at, but a fact to be accepted, and that quiet respect unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Later, when the sun climbed higher and the ranch settled into its rhythm, he found her on the porch feeding the puppy with trembling hands, smiling despite herself as it spilled milk down its chin, and he leaned against a post, arms crossed, finally asking what she planned to do now, not demanding, not judging, just asking, and she surprised herself by answering honestly, telling him she did not know, that she had run until running was all she had left, that staying anywhere meant owing something, and owing had always cost her too much, and he listened without interruption, then said simply that staying here meant work, not charity, that she would earn her keep same as anyone, and that the puppy would too, in its own useless way, a faint smile touching his mouth, and for the first time since she had knocked on his door she laughed, a small broken sound, but real, and the days that followed stitched themselves together with labor and quiet moments, her hands blistering from chores she had never done before, his watching from a distance without hovering, correcting only when necessary, trusting her to learn, and trust, she realized, was rarer than gold. The town took notice, whispers traveling faster than cattle drives, questions about why the rich cowboy had taken in a woman with nothing and a stray pup, predictions that it would end badly, that she would steal or leave or break something precious. And when she heard those whispers in the supply store, old shame rising like bile, she almost packed to go. But that night she found him on the porch, the puppy asleep at his boots, staring out at the dark land as if measuring the future, and when she told him what people were saying, he shrugged, saying people always talked, that it was easier than thinking, and then, after a pause, he told her his own story. Not in full, just enough, about a time he had needed someone to say, "You stayed too," and no one had. About money earned after loss, about walls built so high even kindness had trouble climbing them. And she understood then that he had not saved her, not really, and she had not saved the puppy alone either. They had all arrived at that door broken in different ways, and chosen not to turn each other away. The turning point came when trouble finally did, as it always does, in the shape of a man from her past who rode up demanding she come back, claiming ownership of debts and promises she had never agreed to, his voice loud enough for the ranch hands to hear, shame threatening to swallow her whole as she stood frozen until the cowboy stepped between them, not with fists or threats, but with a quiet authority that stripped the other man of power word by word, making it clear that whatever she had been, whatever she had owed, ended at that gate, and when the man left, cursing, she broke down at last, sobbing into her hands, the puppy whining in confusion, and the cowboy rested a steady hand on her shoulder, saying nothing. Because sometimes safety is not words but presence, and as the seasons turned, her fear loosened its grip, replaced by something steadier, a sense of belonging earned, not given. And one evening, as she watched the puppy chase fireflies in the yard, grown stronger and clumsier by the day, she realized the truth she had been too afraid to name. That night in the rain had not been an ending or a rescue, but a beginning for all of them. And when she thanked him at last, really thanked him, he shook his head, eyes on the horizon, and said it had been a fair trade, one small life left at his door for two that stayed. And if this story moved you, if you believe that one choice, one open door, one whispered you stay too can change everything, then remember to subscribe to the channel.